Thank you for the beautiful music. The chanting was lovely. That duet was marvelous. And we're not done yet. I'm Asha, most of you know. I've been away for about 5 weeks. This is a very brief sighting. I've been working, as most of you know, on a book about my years with Swami Kriyananda, which I am extremely happy with, and happy to say that I think the end is in sight. So, yeah. I'll be back next week when Jyotish and Devi are here, but perhaps one more month after that. I'm probably as eager as you are for you to read it. Yesterday was Swami Kriyananda's birthday, the anniversary of his birth, since he's no longer on this planet. So the service, I'm not going to even try to talk about the reading today, I'll just talk about that. Especially also, that's just what I've been doing for all this time. There's so many different strings to pick it up from. When a person has been in seclusion as much as I have been this last year, all of you have been extremely supportive in just allowing me to disappear. I've spent months working on this writing. Swami Kriyananda said himself that he's, as he put it, trying to teach a new kind of creativity, where instead of a person thinking that I'm going to make something out of my own mind or express myself, one tries to attune on more subtle levels to the energy that is already there, even the astral form of something that's already there. And you put yourself in tune with that astral form, and then it's able to come through you. I was listening to the audio book, which it happens to be my own voice, but that's incidental, of the last book that Swamiji wrote, which oddly enough was a novel. He rewrote a novel called Life Everlasting that was popular 100 years ago. It was written by a spiritual woman named Marie Corelli, who was a very popular author at that time. Ramurti and Sita and used to run this huge used bookstore on Castro Avenue for many years. Every time Swami Kriyananda would come to town, he'd go in there. He said he loved it because he was a bookworm and he would buy books and he always liked to read. But he said it was also a little depressing for an author to go in there and just see all those books just sitting there, thousands and thousands of books, and he'd certainly contributed his share to book pollution in the universe, and then there it was. And also that people who had been so popular, like Marie Corelli, who was so popular and then gone, So anyway, he picked up her book and he rewrote it. It's called Love Perfected, Life Divine. And the theme was soulmates. Beautiful theme. The soul's everlasting longing for perfect love. Swamiji himself said, this is in the introduction to the book, he said to me, Master said all desires have to be fulfilled before God realization will come. He said the longing in the human heart to be loved. And then he said it so, Swamiji was so practical. He said not merely by God, but to be loved by one other person. He said that longing is so deep in the human heart, it's impossible to imagine that God would not have put that desire in our hearts if he didn't also intend to fulfill it. And so Marie Corelli wrote this very romantic story about Santoris and the nameless heroine. She never has a name, and they meet, and then she goes through, but the actual story is the perfection that she must achieve in order to match him. Because through their many incarnations, they've messed it up every time. This is how the story goes. They loved each other, but one way or another, they killed each other and they hated each other and then they loved each other every once in a while and then they didn't. And it's a very clever story. And eventually he recognizes that the problem is not between them, the problem is within each one of them. So he withdraws for many incarnations and goes on a spiritual quest until he masters himself. And then he finds her again. But for her now to be with him, she must do the same thing. So then the story is how she goes off and meets this, goes to the house of Alcyon and goes through all these marvelous things. I recorded that audiobook almost just sort of impulsively. I was in India and we had use of this studio. And I realized that, of course, the heroine in that book is a female, so Swami had already passed, but he couldn't tell that story. It had to be told by a woman. But I think I read it just because I really wanted to read it. And when you have to read out loud, especially into recorder, you have to say every word. And you have to hear every word. Because what that woman does is she faces every single fear that she has. Because the reason, twofold, the reason that every desire has to be fulfilled is because desires cause us to be agitated. Or if any desire that you have makes it impossible for you to be still. It may not be that you're grabbing at it, but some part of you is oscillating out of the fact that you don't have what you want. And so before we can come into the absolute oneness of God, then all of those oscillations have to be stopped. In Patanjali it says yoga, which is union with the infinite, is the neutralization of the whirlpools of chitta, they call it, which is consciousness essentially. But in other words, the whirlpools of feeling, everything, when it stops, then union takes place. It's not like union is difficult to achieve, we just have to stop resisting it, like this. And of course, fear, we think of desire and somehow as positive, but fear is the mother of all desires, because it's fear that causes us to be so trapped in the yes, I want it, no, I don't. Because we're afraid of this, so we desire that. And we're just constantly moving. So this story, where this woman, I actually thought the recording wasn't very good, but it's actually pretty good. And the book is so dense, it's almost better to hear it. But this woman goes through this thing, which just turns, I won't spoil the drama. But she goes through all these internal tests of how much courage do you have, how much trust do you have, how much faith do you have, how much confidence do you have in your own perception of reality. And she's just pushed absolutely to the limit, and the story has a happy ending. So she makes it through in the end. But the drama of the life that we're living, I mean, this is a fictional story. One of the last time that I really talked to Swamiji, he was talking about, he was giving me a list of what I had to do, pretty much. And one of them he said, society is more influenced by novels than by any other form. And he suggested that I should write one, which, I'm willing to do anything now. But the point was, let me find it. The drama of the life that we're living is so completely different than we think it is. I mean, one can say that to oneself over and over and over again. But if you don't quit on the spiritual path, and that's really the only condition, and really you can't quit. You can go sit on the bench for a while, but you can't get off the team. You simply can't, because this is what we are. So sooner or later we're going to do it. If you don't quit, it just gradually, all the words that you hear, they suddenly make sense. And there's this statement in the Bhagavad Gita, which is often quoted, what is day to the worldly man is night to the yogi. What is night to the worldly man is day to the yogi. In other words, is before you understand that the purpose of life is spiritual, this is what you think you should be doing. And then after you understand, this is what you think you should be doing. And what makes it more confusing, and this actually does relate a little to our scripture reading today, is that in this day and age, we don't get to drop out. I don't know really if it was any easier. I don't really think there's any shortcuts. I think there's just different incarnations. There were incarnations. You read the life of St. Francis and St. Clare, and Francis, in order to follow what he wanted to follow, he just walked away from everything. He was the son of one of the wealthiest men in Assisi. He was extremely privileged. He was popular. He was everything in the town. In this little town, he was the leader of the happy crew, and his dad was so proud of him and gave him everything he wanted. And then Francis had this awakening, and he realized that that was really not why he was born. He was born to realize God. So he repudiated everything of his family, and he just walked out, but he didn't go far. He just walked out to the woods and became this impoverished troubadour for God, joyous. I mean, see, in retrospect, it's all so obvious, but it wasn't obvious at the time. Here, this man who had everything left it all, and then he would come back into town. I mean, this is all real people. These are not cartoons. These are not animated things. These are real people. He'd been wealthy and privileged, and now he comes back in dressed in rags and barefoot, goes right back into the center of town, and starts telling everyone, do thou likewise. What you're doing isn't really going to make you happy. Do what I'm doing. And his poor dad, had to see him there. I mean, I've never raised children, but I know those of you who have. You invest a lot, and you hope for more than this, right? That he'd become an absolute embarrassment. And the father never actually got over it. But there it is. And he did actually, then a lot of people in that generation were lost. A lot of those nobles lost their children to this pazzi, that's the word they use in Italian, this crazy man who just took them out there. And Claire runs away from home and goes to this convent, and her brothers try to drag her away, and she, holds onto the rail and becomes miraculously too heavy, and then she takes her long blonde hair and cuts it off, which of course, women didn't cut their hair, and it made her entirely unsuitable then to marry. And that's how she saved herself and became a nun. And then also, once you really gave yourself to God, nobody quite had the nerve to try to take you back, right? But in other words, a lot was required. Now, when we got to do it that way, it had its ups and downs. Out in those cold, unheated caves, that was a little tough. There were lots of parts of it. Having those big iron doors clang in front of you, that was a little tough, never coming out again. Is it any tougher than living in Silicon Valley? I'm not sure. We have more food, but I'm not at all sure. Because sooner or later, we have to face every fear. We have to surrender every desire. And we have to recognize that what we thought was day was actually night, and what we thought was night was actually day. Now, this would be absolutely impossible for us if we didn't have living examples. So there's this other drama that goes on, which has just been going on forever, which is every so often somebody who knows the beginning, the middle, and the end of the story, like Paramhansa Yogananda, Jesus Christ, Buddha, they drop in on us. And they just show up. They're born to some devout set of parents, usually. Every once in a while they're not, but usually their parents are extremely devout. And they grow up with this zeal for the right end of the story. It's what happens to most of us is the way I think about it. We get thrown down from the astral world. We kind of get thrown over this huge wall, Most of us turn our back to the wall and run toward whatever's over here. I mean, little tiny, brand new children, little tiny babies. I remember watching Leah Mahoney when she was, less than 5 minutes old, just reaching up and grabbing her daddy's finger, like that. And also his heart, just bingo, like that. And I was thinking, oh my God, look at that. She's reaching out for something immediately. She's a very fine person. She's grown up to be a fine person, wonderful parents, everything. But as soon as we turn our back and we start running for the reflected light. If you shine a light on something, it'll look like it's shining back. And so we think that's the source. We don't realize the source is here, shining from here. It's shining on it, so it's shining, and we try to grab it. And every time you put your fingers on it, the master falls in. He turns and looks at the wall, and then he starts burrowing through it. And he's got his back to everything that we're chasing. And after a while of this, it begins to occur to us, what is he doing? And then this nice radiance begins to come out of him. And we begin to sense, oh yeah, there's a source there, not just a reflection. And so Yogananda's been coming. These masters have been coming for a very long time, and they bring their little crew with them. And we're that crew. We're part of that crew. But there's always these other really powerful partners. I was reading the life of Sri Ramakrishna, and his life is so... there's not a lot that's real Western rational about that life. I mean, it's perfectly sensible, but it's way out of the box. But he tells all these stories of these great sages from here and this great sage from here. And, these young Indian men would come in and he would, you're that one and you're that one and you're that one. And they were his team. Because the master just plants this power, and then somebody has to do all the hard work. And Kriyananda has been walking with Yogananda for many incarnations in this same way. Master comes in, he sets it, and then Swami says, okay, given all the tools, all the pieces that you have given me, let me knit it into something. So we can relate to a certain extent to Master's life, but none of us had the karma to walk with him, although perhaps in other lives we have. I really don't know. But the one that we've walked with is the one who knits it together and who sees what the potential is for us in this life, in this time, in this incarnation, given all the chaotic karma we have. And there's something so astounding, going back to the Love Perfected, Life Divine. You have this story here of this woman and this man, and it's a romantic story, it's a divinely romantic story, and it's a humanly romantic story. In Marie Corelli's book, when they finally get together, they just get on his luxurious yacht, and they sail around together alone for the rest of their lives. Swami says, that sounds more like hell than heaven to me. In Swami's book, they get on his yacht and they sail around the world helping everybody else, which sounds a little bit nicer. But let me just find where I was going for a moment. But what you have is, you have this story which is motivated by the desire for love and the desire for joy. And in a romantic story like that, we get it. We get what that is, because we all have those feelings one way or another. Whether they come out in terms of human partnership, whether it's our pets, our flowers, whatever it is, there's this longing inside of us both to give and also to have it be given back. And what we begin to understand when we see these great souls moving through their lives, like Swami Kriyananda, whose life I've been so immersed in, even there's no shortcut. Even when a very exalted soul takes on a human body, they live in the same prison we do, and they're subject to the same system. That's how I often think of it. It's like they willingly go into the prison. They're not guilty of the crime. We're guilty of the crime. But they willingly go into the same prison, and then they have the same rough guards and the same crummy food and the same hard bed and the same icky people, and the same fine, noble people. But what they demonstrate for us, and what Swami Kriyananda's life demonstrated, is what it looks like not to quit. And I know I've been singing the same tune for quite a while, but when I was younger, I used to think that there were a lot of other issues. I used to think that all those decisions that I made actually mattered. What do you know? I think they seemed like so important at the time. Where I lived and who I lived with and what my position was and whether I had children. Just like they all seemed so important. But now I realize it's all just a means to an end. And they are important. They're wonderfully important because they're our vrittis. They are what is oscillating. And it just oscillates. And so it's oscillating and it sucks us into it. It sucks us into this relationship, into this autoimmune disease, into this financial catastrophe, into this success so that I can think that I'm really doing pretty well. Can't you everybody see how well I'm doing? Or just before the fall, how humiliated I am now. It just goes on and on and on. But what's day to the yogi is night, day and night. The only thing that matters is one. Are we chiseling through the wall? And if what we meet is, I have to raise a family, I have to go bankrupt, I have to be ill, I have to be world famous, whatever it is, the only point is that we keep chipping away at it. And the chipping away at it is, Swami used the phrase, which I've repeated many times, which I'm just finally beginning to understand. He said, I never identify with Swami Kriyananda. He is an event for which I am responsible. And recently that's come to me. It's sort of like where you stand in the whole thing. Because are these peripheral experiences, which is our life, for example, are we living at the edge? Master said, there's just phrases, if you were just like trapped on a desert island with only one phrase to meditate on, some of these are so good. One of them is, we make a grave mistake when we think that everything that happens to us concerns us personally. I heard that when I was 20. That was the wackiest thing I had ever heard. I had no idea. There was no piece of me that could figure out what to do with that. Of course it concerns me personally. How could it not? Sometimes I would even suggest to Swami that he not teach these things because nobody could understand them. He was so gracious. He just had a way of kind of going like that. He didn't say, what a moron. But he just respected me and then ignored me. That was just right. And if I was listening, I noticed. But it's where your center is. And it's almost physical. It's like you back up from your own reality. And it's still happening. It's the extension of your reach. But are you living here? Are you living here? There's a giant elm in our community, and it's just a perfect example to me. The trunk is so massive. You get your little human body up against it, and I'm going to push on this tree. And it doesn't even know you're there, except in the most sort of patronizing sort of way at your arrogance. But that tree is equally present at the farthest extension where it's making one tiny leaf. Because that one tiny leaf could never exist. When Helen read income for our quality of the week, I thought, this is Swami's birthday. Income? But you know, it was brilliant. Matter is inert unless there's energy put into it. And money, which we were talking about, it's inert. It's energy that makes it something. And that little leaf at the end is inert, except for the tree. So all of these experiences, we are responsible. We really are responsible because our vrittis are agitating into all these things, and we have to sort that out. All those fears and desires have to be faced and resolved, because otherwise we get to keep them. Really, nobody has to punish us. We just get to keep them. If we don't resolve them, we get to do them again. And if you're not enjoying it now, you're not going to enjoy it any more the next time. Probably a little less, the anguishing monotony of it. So we have these powerhouses, and Kriyananda's the one that has been the most dynamic, certainly in my life and in many of yours, where he just moved constantly. He was just like a force that never, ever, ever stopped. But what he was doing in all of that, writing this book, writing this music, starting this community, traveling here, doing this, going through litigation, going through disappointment, going through health, going through all these different things. Just he always had his back to delusion and his face toward the Spirit. And he never put the chisel and the hammer down. He just kept doing it. And so when it presents itself in a new way, like a sculptor with a big piece of marble, you have to ask, well, what is trying to happen here? SRF has this phrase they use. They say, Master left a blueprint in the ether. And the blueprint in the ether is how his work is supposed to evolve. Well, Swami said something so interesting about that. First of all, you can't have something material in the ether. So it's not a physical thing, it's not a fact. He said, it's a vibration of attunement. What else is it? And he says, Master moved through life responding to opportunities as they presented themselves. He did not have a plan. He just responded to opportunities as they presented themselves, which is exactly how Swami has moved, which is why, he goes to Australia and he comes back with opals, and we're going to sell these opals, and we're going to build the retreat with these opals. And he goes to Sweden and he sees these prefab houses, which are completely charming. So we're going to bring in all these prefab houses, and that's, how we're going to do it. Or maybe we could start a One Faith Federation, and he asked Kabir to head up the One Faith Federation with the magazine. Why not? He meets an Italian group of charismatic Catholics, and all of a sudden we can get into the Catholic Church because an opportunity presented itself, and he tried to see if it was on the energy vibration of Master's consciousness. And if it is, you follow it. And if it isn't, you step away from it. And you don't always know. And whether or not it succeeds or fails, we didn't make a lot of money off the opals. We don't have a One Faith Federation. And when Michael Gornick and Dharmadas were assigned the job of investigating the Swedish houses, as we called them. This was before email or anything like that, so they had to just call on the phone. They're trying to figure out, what are we buying? These are builders. They finally get this Swedish man who gets a dictionary, and he says, they say, what are these made out of? They said, particle board. Particle board. Particle board. Dharmadas says, we are not importing particle board all the way from Sweden. So he refused to do it, not realizing that Swami wanted innovative architecture. He wanted a unified look to the community. He wanted us to think outside the box. 10 years later, Dharmadas says to me, I didn't have any idea what he was doing. I just thought, I'm not buying particle board all the way from Sweden. He just missed it. But Swami saw this vibration in the ether. He saw this opportunity coming to him. It matched the vibration, so he went with it. That's all that we're all doing. There's a blueprint in the ether for all our karma too. But it's not fixed like that. It's an energy, which is while we're raising our children going bankrupt and dying from some long withering disease, it doesn't really matter. What matters is whether we hold to that vibration and that we take every opportunity to move into it. You know, not just the pleasurable or unpleasurable or success or failure or humiliation or adoration ones. It doesn't really matter. You know, this is just an event for which I'm responsible. I stand way back from here and I reach out like that elm tree and I make whatever leaves are needed. You know, and then what happens is it all begins to look different. At the end of Swamiji's life, so beautifully, he said, so many people become bitter at the end of their life. He says, what is there to be bitter about? Can't they see it's all bliss? No, sir, they can't. And no, sir, neither do I a lot of the time. But I'm beginning to get it. I'm beginning to get that he, Swamiji, and Master, and all these great ones are just there, and they're just pulsing like this. A woman wrote to me, a woman I've met only once. She lives in another part of the country. She was sitting at the Moksha Mandir where Swami's body is buried, and she wrote me a little bit embarrassedly, I guess that's the word. And she said, I'm writing you because Swami whispered a message into my ear. And I think he did, and I was very happy to get it. It was a simple message, and most of it was just that happened. And she sort of basically said, I just took Kriya, you know, how could this happen? How could it not happen? Were you listening? I said, you were sitting in the Moksha Mandir. And what is so extraordinary, which is the most extraordinary thing, I guess, about all of it, the relationships are all so personal. That love perfected life divine that we want with that one human who understands us, we start with God. It actually works the other way around also. If we just listen, you know, their Master said, I am as much in all of you as I am in myself. I know every single thought you think. Swami said, so do I, essentially. If you want. See, that's the whole thing. If you want, what do we want? If we want to hear all of this and all these fears and all of this habit and all of these desires and everything like that, that's what we'll hear. If we don't want to hear that, if we want to hear the whisper from eternity, it's really simple. Just ask. And you know, we don't even have to ask very well. The Piglet prayer is my favorite prayer. The Piglet prayer is they were lost. Piglet and Pooh were lost in the fog, and they just didn't know where they were. And Piglet loses courage. This is the Winnie the Pooh stories. Piglet loses courage very easily. So Piglet was down on the ground, and Piglet dropped his little head on his arm like that. And there's, you know, the little picture of Piglet like this. And then Piglet manages just to do this. Help, help, help! And of course, they're about 10 feet away from everyone. They're just lost in the fog. The Piglet prayer works really, really well. Doesn't have to be any better than that, because they are hovering, just waiting for the slightest bit of interest. And then they'll flood us with wisdom, bliss, joy, love, fulfillment. God bless you.